Oh, look, thanks very much, John, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Look, after that, I don't know that I can really match that in terms of the whole philosophical framework and the underpinning of the party. But I'd say a few things off the back of that, probably then get into almost how we're going with the campaign. Firstly, I thought that was really, really helpful in terms of framing what we've got to try and do, and you've been talking about this for a long time, John, but I just thought that was a tremendous talk about really what we've got to do and the importance of values. And frankly, that is the problem, to talk about problems from it, that's the problem with the Liberal Party at the moment, and indeed the National Party, and it's because they have departed from the real values of the founder. There's a piece about me in the Courier Mail today by Des Houghton, and when I was talking to Des, I pulled out a book that I have that the Liberal Party published almost 20 years ago about some of the speeches and radio addresses in the 1940s, I think it was, by Robert Menzies. And there's the particularly famous speech called The Forgotten People that went to air in 1942. And I was explaining to Des that going back some months ago, Jake Thrupp, who is Alan Jones's producer, a senior producer, contacted me and said, look, I'm putting a book together about where Australia should be going, and particularly with voices from the conservative side of politics. And he said, would you like to contribute a chapter? I said, well, I'd be delighted. And I sat down and I wrote that. And as I now look at that work that I did, and the chapter for that book that is now about to be launched, I realised that was, if you like, my departure letter. Didn't know it at the time, but what I did is I sat down and I wrote in the spirit of someone internally in the Liberal Party, the Liberal National Party, trying to say what was wrong with the party. And I'd urge you to buy the book that Jake's putting out. It's going to be published by Connor Court. But for those members of the Liberal Democrats, very happy to send it out. You can put on the email address that chapter, because it really was something I showed John when we first sat down, when he first started to talk to me and recruit me. I said, have a read of this. This is where I'm coming from. And Menzies was a great Australian, and Menzies' values and his philosophy when he put the Liberal Party together actually are quite instructive for us as well. Maybe there are things that we would reject in today's environment, but some of it is, well, a lot of it is profoundly important, particularly what he said about who the Liberal Party in those days were trying to pitch for, because I think that's who we're after as well, frankly. It's people who believe in self-reliance, people who believe in personal responsibility, people who want to live their lives quietly without the intrusion of government, people who believe that their future is best handled by themselves and their friends and family, not by some external force being government. People who want to be able to, take and keep most of those rewards that they earn with the sweat of their own brow. That's what Menzies was saying all those years ago. So I sat down with Des the other day and I said, look, here's what the book says, here's what the party was meant to be about, here's where they are, and they're not. Because the last 18 months have really demonstrated that they're inhabited by people from very narrow backgrounds, peak industry lobby groups, political staff jobs, political staffing jobs for politicians, and then obviously going into politics themselves. So they don't have a real background in the real world. Now there's a few exceptions, but most of them, and I pointed out to Des a few examples like the federal member for Brisbane or the federal member for Ryan, two classic examples. And there's so many of them. And Matt Canavan as well, who essentially I'm competing against in this Senate election, he's actually a pretty good operator, but even he really doesn't have that broad background. And so what you get then is people who don't actually live the values of the party, and they don't understand about what their policies, their laws, their regulations have done to small business in this country. And over the last 18 months, we have seen, really the rise of very big government coming from the coalition, quite reckless spending. They had to take action, I give you that, but they constructed programs in haste that have then been poorly executed. And the idea behind, extremely wealthy, profitable companies getting JobKeeper and no ability to claw some of that money back is just one example. They've also stood by while our civil liberties have been curtailed. I mean, what I would ask the Prime Minister today is, what do you think about excessive use of force by the Victorian Police that we saw this week? Josh Frydenberg continues to pop up in the media talking about his soft voice and I really care, and I don't believe Josh. What's Josh saying about the heavy-handed actions of the Victorian government, the crushing of people's businesses and livelihoods, family businesses who deserve to earn a living? And I could go on, but that's something that's really incensed me, as has the way that while this has been going on, they've passed some quite sinister legislation. I'm talking, for example, about the recent surveillance legislation that allows law enforcement bodies to go in, essentially hack into Australian social media and their personal accounts and modify information. And that can be done not with a warrant from a judge, but with, I don't know, I'd barely call it a warrant, someone from the AAT can actually sign off on the police doing that. And of course, it was dressed up that this is about going after pedophiles, but it actually can be used for far less serious offences. And that was waved through by both major political parties. And we're here today to deal with as well, of course, a bit of overreach where they seek to legislate away the use of names that are in the common lexicon of political discourse, like Liberal or Democrat or Labor even. And that's just not on. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a snapshot about how I feel about where we are. This is a very important election, and thankfully I think people are engaged. That growing minority, John, that you spoke about, is a growing and angry and frustrated minority, and they need a sensible group of people offering real leadership. They need those people as their party of protest, and with their assistance we can actually achieve some really important things and then hold the major parties to account in the Senate. As to how the campaign's going, well, there's been a lot of work behind the scenes to get going, get organised. We've now got a national campaign director in the form of Michael Pucci, and he's been on the case for about a week now. We've got Mark Horitzik, who is the Queensland campaign director. We've had Queensland campaign meetings now. We've managed to raise some significant money. We've been running those radio ads on 4BC. Got a lot of positive feedback about that. One person actually wrote to Kirsten the other day and said they joined because they heard the jingle. I've had one negative email where a guy said he really hated it and it was terrible, and I apologised to him and said, because you're going to be hearing a whole lot more of that. So apologies in advance. We had a few good runs in the media, I think. But really what we're going to be doing is gearing up with social media. So we're going to be using Facebook, Twitter and Instagram particularly to actually push out our own targeted messages. We're not going to be relying on the mainstream media, and Mark and myself will really get going with that in coming days. So I'm really looking forward to one other final ingredient, which is the great work that this policy committee with Rob Cribb from Central Coast of New South Wales and assisted by John Ruddock, who's going to be producing some material that is about to pop out for review, and I'm looking forward to that because we need to be able to talk about more things about COVID in the coming weeks and months. I think my final point is it's very clear about where this election is going to be from the coalition side. I think the Prime Minister is going to be running on national security. The whole thing about the nuclear subs and the revitalised alliance with the UK and the US is going to be very big, feature in a major sort of way in the election campaign. But if you really distill it down to, again, it's a bit, in a way, I'm afraid, shabby, because there's a scary world out there. Be scared, be frightened. You've got to trust me, I'm the Prime Minister, I'll make it all right. And that, I'm afraid, is what our politicians have been doing for the last 18 months with COVID as well. So we need to have a position on that sort of stuff, and we need to point out to Australians what's really going on.